very happy to be with you today. Very happy actually to share the knowledge that I have acquired for the last 10, 15 years regarding this topic. So the impact of climate change on health and safety of workers in Quebec and in Canada, and also talking about the adaptation of workplaces. The learning objective of this seminar are the following. So at the end of the presentation, I hope that the participant will be able to describe the impact of climate change on health and safety of workers, describe the different vulnerability factors, and also propose adaptation measure for the impact of heat waves on workers. So here are the outlines of my presentation. I will first of all talk about the evolution knowledge of the topic of climate change and their impact on workers. After, I will present the development of Pan-Canadian conceptual framework on climate change and health and safety of workers. After, I'm going to take time to present you a little more what we do in Quebec. So we have a scientific program on the adaptation of work to climate change. And I will also present you our most recent research project, which is published, and it's on workplace adaptation to the effect of climate change. And at the end of all this, I will have question for you. So let's start all together. So regarding the knowledge evolution, well, in Quebec, and I would say in Canada, everything started in 2009 with the publication of the first conceptual framework on the relationship between climate change and occupational health and safety. This framework was published by NIOSH, and it was really an international representation of the impact of climate change on workers' health and safety. And this framework really inspired my one of my co-director of PhD at the time. And so his name was Joseph Zayed. And so Joseph asked me if I wanted to work on the first conceptual framework for Quebec. So that's what I did. And it was the first part of my thesis, actually. And so we have published the first conceptual framework on the negative impact of climate change on workers' health and safety in 2012. You have the reference here, and we're going to look at very rapidly, we're going to look at the conceptual framework in the next slide. After that, well, since that, we've been developing more and more knowledge regarding this topic in Quebec. So we have developed knowledge on the impact of increased temperature, the impact of the degradation of air quality, the impact of extreme weather events and mental health, and also impacts related to increased zoonosis. So what you have here is the conceptual framework that we have published in 2012. I'm sorry, it's very, very small, but you have the reference on the here on the slide, so you can find the reference if ever you want to. I'm going to take time to explain you the framework a little, but not that much, because we're going to take more time later to talk about the new framework that we have developed. So on the figure that you have in front, you can see that the impact of climate change are divided in three categories. So the first impact are the one that are direct on the individual, so direct on the worker. Then we have impact of climate change that have an impact on natural resources, and that would impact the health and safety of workers who depends on these natural resources for living. And the impact of climate change can also be on various elements regarding the socio-economical context, and this can bring health and safety impact on workers who work in this socio-economical context. And so, as you can see, for the first category, we have 5 hazards that we have identified, so that have a direct effect on the workers and that can exacerbate with climate change. So we have increased zoonosis, degradation of air quality, increased heat waves and temperature, increased severity and frequency of extreme weather events, and increase in UV radiation exposure. Then regarding the natural resources, we have impact of climate change on the agricultural ecosystem. We have impact of climate change on aquatic ecosystem, and we have impact of climate change on the forestry ecosystem, the forest ecosystem. And then in the socioeconomical context, we have the degradation of the built environment due to climate change, and we have the increase in green jobs. In the next slide, we're going to look at all these more in details. And so to finish on this framework, the first half circle here represent the hazards and exposure that would exacerbate with climate change. The second circle describe the health and safety impacts on workers due to these hazards and exposure. And the last half circle represents the industries or the occupation that are the most at risk regarding these hazards. So now I'm going to talk to you about the improvement or the upgrade of this framework. So in 2022, we have developed a new pan-Canadian framework on climate change and OHS. This work was funded by Health Canada, but it was a very, very short study. And the idea was really to update the framework published in 2012 and to be sure that this framework would fit the situation in all provinces of Canada and not just for Quebec. So the work is ongoing. It should be, the framework should be published on the Institute websites somewhere this spring, so very soon. So regarding this project funded by Health Canada, the main objective was to identify key elements that could allow the development of a pan-Canadian initiative that promote the protection of workers' health and safety due to the impact of climate change in Canada. And so to achieve that, first of all, we had to develop the pan-Canadian conceptual framework. To do that, we conduct a rapid literature review. The idea was really to look at the literature to see if there was hazards or occupational health and safety impact or occupation or industrial sectors that we haven't identified in the previous work. So when the framework was developed so the second objective was to validate this framework and complete it by presenting it for input to various organizations working to protect the health and safety of workers. So I have interviewed 8 organizations. They were from 7 provinces and 2 territories, and BC was there. So so I have interviewed someone from WorkSafe BC. And so the idea was to present the framework and ask all the organization, well, is there some missing information? Is there specific topics that are more relevant for your province than other topics? After that, other sub-objectives were to identify the main challenges and concerns of these organizations and to suggest action to support the development of pan-Canadian initiative. I won't talk about the two last sub-objectives because the idea is really to present you the framework, the pan-Canadian framework. So here is the framework. Again, I'm sorry, it's small, but if you zoom, you're going to find it. And as I mentioned, the publication will be on our websites in the next months. There's a lot of similarity with the previous framework that I've showed you. So as you can see, the first circle here represent the hazards that would exacerbate with climate change. The second circle here represents the effect on occupational health and safety. And lastly, the third circle represent the industrial factor that would be impacted by the hazards, and they are presented with the North American, the NAICS code, so North American Industry Classification Code with 2 positions. And so also, as you can see, well, the the part of the circle in pink are related to the impact that are direct on the workers. The part in blue represents the impact of climate change on the ecosystem. And lastly, the part in yellow represent the impact of climate change on the socio-economical context. And you can see quite the same categories as I have presented before. So regarding the impact of direct on workers, we have identified as hazards the increase in temperature and heat waves, degradation of air quality, increase in UV exposure, increase in geographic distribution of animals, and increase in frequency and severity of extreme weather events. Then regarding the ecosystem disturbance that could bring an impact on health and safety of workers who depends on these ecosystem for living. So we have identified disturbance in the agricultural ecosystem, in the aquatic ecosystem, in the forest ecosystem, and in ice ecosystem. And lastly, for the context socio-economical, we have identified the degradation of built environment and also green industries. So in the next slide, we're going to look at details, a little more details on each of these hazards and impacts on occupational health and safety. So I give two examples here of impacts that are direct on workers. The first one is the increase in annual temperature and the increase in severity and frequency of heat waves. So as you know, in Canada, we will go through these changes because of climate change, and there are many occupational health and safety impacts that are already known for workers. So of course, heat-related symptoms, diseases, and injuries, and that in Quebec we have, I would say, once every 2 years, we have, unfortunately, one disease that is caused by heat exposure. Well, it's through occupational exposure. But other symptoms are exacerbation of cardiovascular and renal diseases, increased absorption of some xenobiotic, accident and injuries due to the lack of vigilance. And the climate change will also increase the temperature in summer, but will also increase the temperature in winter. I know here in Quebec, we have a very warm winter, for instance, and this can create or bring some other OHS impacts. We believe that if the winter are more soft and less cold, well, the workers might get less acclimatized to cold. And so when there's a very extreme cold that comes, well, the workers are not as acclimatized to go through it. And this could cause cold-related diseases and injuries. Example of industrial sectors that can be impacted by these hazards are, first of all, workers who work outdoors, so like in agriculture and construction, but also workers that work indoors. So for instance, in accommodation and food services, like in restaurants, for instance, or again, healthcare and social assistance worker. Example of provinces who told me that provinces and territories who told me that these topics was a problem was actually all the interviewed provinces. And then for the cold impact, well, Quebec, Alberta, Newfoundland, and Labrador told me that this topic was something important for them too. Then if we look at the increase in severity and frequency of extreme weather events such as floods, forest fire, storm, drought. So these hazards can also bring OHS impacts. So for instance, accident and injuries, including fatalities, psychosocial impact, exacerbation of respiratory and cardiovascular diseases, and cold-related symptoms, disease, and injuries. An example of industrial sector that would be impacted by these hazards are mainly administrative and support, waste management and remediation services, and public administration. I think to illustrate this, one situation that I usually present is, for instance, the frontline workers, so policemen and firefighters who are there to manage the crisis related to extreme weather events such as floods and firefighters. So these are one of the workers population that are the most at risk of this type of impact. So all provinces and territories that I have interviewed told me that this impact was important for them, but of course there was difference between each province. So for some province, forest fire were more important. For other, like in Quebec, for instance, it was more floods. Now, if we look at example of impact of climate change on ecosystem that will also bring impact on workers' health and safety, here are two examples. So disturbance in the agricultural ecosystem first. So we know with climate change that, for instance, the new climatic condition will bring new pests into our crops. So new pest means the use of new pesticides or more important quantity of pesticides. And so this can bring new chemical or biological exposure to our workers. We know also with climate change, or we believe that with climate change, some breeding method might change. For instance, animals can spend more time inside just to protect them from heat waves. And so this can create more risk of zoonosis and spread of zoonosis. And so more risk for workers also to get these zoonoses. We know that with climate change, some crops will be favored and some other crops won't be favored. So this means adaptation for workers too. And some of these farmers, for instance, might be stressed or anxious by the fact that they have to adapt and they have to work more to be sure that they get the same outcomes. And so this is this could create psychosocial impact. And lastly, again, disturbance in the agricultural ecosystem can also bring some accident and injuries to our workers. So you have here an example of provinces and territories that told me that this topic was something important for them. Another example is related to the aquatic ecosystem. So again, with climate change, we know that some marine toxin might get more important or some toxic algae too. So this means new chemical or new biological exposure for workers. We know that again, some fish species will be favored and other won't be favored. So it means adaptation for the fishers. It means most probably doing the activity in more remote area, or also doing their activity and fishing when the conditions are not as good. And so all this means more accident or more injuries, including fatalities. Again, the disturbance in the aquatic ecosystem can also bring psychological impact of these workers. An example of impacted province and territories that would be impacted, and you have the list here. So almost all the provinces that were interviewed. Now, if we look at the socio-economical context changes and their impact on workers' health and safety. So the first example is the degradation of built environment. Usually the example that I present here is the melting of permafrost up north in Canada. So permafrost where we find roads, we find bridges, we find industrial structure. And because of the melting of permafrost, where all these structure are destroyed, and so it means more hazardous environment. So new working condition, new hazards. This can lead to accident and injuries, and also stress and anxiety due to this new hazardous condition. So psychological impact. Example of industries that could be impacted, well, there's mining, carrying, and oil and gas extraction, utilities, transportation, and warehousing, for instance. And all the province and territories that were interviewed told me that this was a topic for them, not necessarily the melting of permafrost, but the degradation of the built environment. Lastly, the last socioeconomical change that we look at that can bring impact on OHS is the emergence of green jobs. So those jobs that are green for the environment, but that are not necessarily green for workers. So we can think about recycling, we can think about renewable energy, we can think about the use of greener substance in agriculture, for instance. So all these are um, could be defined as green jobs, and this bring new chemical and biological exposure or new working condition with new hazards. I already told you example of industry that can be impacted by this. And lastly, well, all the provinces, the interviewed provinces told me that this topic was something important for them. And after this, I wanted to take a minute or two to talk to you about vulnerability factor. So factors that can exacerbate or increase the impact of climate change on workers' health and safety. These impacts can be classified in two categories. So the first one is individual factors such as age, weight, sex, gender, health condition, socioeconomic condition, ethnicity, employment status, degree of acclimatization to an hazard, etc. And so the other category is more work-related factors, such as in the working environment factor, the location, the condition, the period, and the level of OHS training, and the type of work, so the task and associated workload, or also the wearing of protecting equipment. So now, if we look at the scientific program that we have in Quebec on adaptation of work to climate change, I will just verify the time to see if I'm okay with you. Yes, I'm all good. We have developed this scientific program in more or less 2017. You have the link of the website if ever you're interested to look at it. The idea of this scientific program is to produce and transfer scientific knowledge to support the decision of public health authorities, decision maker, and manager of health and social services establishment, to optimize the public health practices regarding climate change and occupational health and safety, and to better understand the determinants of health among the workers at risk. And to achieve that, we do three type of activities. So we develop knowledge through research and intervention project. We produce tools to support public health practices, and we transferred knowledge. So I just put here example of published research that we have conducted. Where you see stars, it's where we have reports or scientific publications that are in English. So we have, for instance, conducted research on the impact of heat. The idea was, first of all, to evaluate the relationship between summer temperature and the compensation claim related to heat related symptoms or to traumatic injuries for 5 provinces in Canada. So we look at what was the relationship. The idea was to know if it's warmer in summer, do we have more workers who are compensated for heat-related problems or for traumatic injuries? And after that, we have projected the number of compensated claims that we would have in 2050 with the increase of temperature that is projected with climate change. So this report can be found in English on our website. We also have conducted work on extreme weather events and mental health. So the idea was to, well, this work was to make a literature review and to know what are the psychosocial impacts on workers who are managing extreme weather events such as heat waves, floods, forest fire, and storm. So this work is published in English too. And we have conducted work on zoonoses. So we have made a literature review to identify for 14 zoonoses that we know in Quebec would be impacted with climate change, who would be the workers the most at risk of these zoonoses. And we have identified some risk factor and protection factor. And also we have identified the main activity that would be conducted in Quebec to better well to what would be the priority action in Quebec to better protect the workers of these regarding these zoonoses. And we also have conducted work like intervention work where we have trained some manager or workers in park. And the idea of the training was for them to be able to communicate what are the prevention measure for tick bites and mosquito bites in the workplace, so in the park, and also to be able to communicate these prevention measures to the public. So that was one of the objective, and the other objective of the training was to teach them how to collect tick in the environment or mosquito in the environment. And so these data would after be added to our data in the surveillance program that we have regarding tick and mosquito borne diseases. Here you have example of tools to support public health practice that we have developed. So we have pamphlets on the prevention of tick-borne diseases in the workplace, and we also have pamphlets for mosquito-borne diseases prevention in the workplace, and we also have one e-learning training. So in 10-15 minutes, workers can learn how to protect themselves from tick bites at the workplace. And as you can see for the pamphlets, we have published them in French, in English, and also in Spanish, because we wanted to be sure that some immigrants, workers could be able to understand also the prevention measure. Example of knowledge transfer activities that we conduct. Well, here you have two. First of all, well, our web page. So I really suggest you, if you're interested by the topics, to go on the web page and to look at what we have done. And we have now in Quebec a series of webinar. So one webinar every month where we present a specific topic, but always in the big topic of climate change and occupational health and safety. If ever you're interested, you can register for these webinars. They are in French, and you can even watch again the one that was given in January and in February. And March, it was today, actually. So for the last part of my talk, I wanted to present you a research project that we have conducted during the pandemic. And it was about workplace adaptation to the effect of climate change. It was more or less the first research project where we really try to identify adaptation measure to climate change to better protect workers. So you have the research team here. I will go through it because I just saw the time and I want to keep time for question and exchange. So I will go a little faster for the next slide. The research objective were, first of all, to identify the priority hazards related to climate change for Quebec workers and the highest risk occupation in terms of these hazards, and also to co-develop adaptation measure to deal with the effect of the priority hazards for worker in the 50 highest risk occupation and discuss their relevance with key actors. So for the first objective, what we have done is that you recognize the framework published in 2012. So we took the framework, the hazards in this framework, and we have conducted a multi-criteria analysis, which made us able to rank the climate change hazards. And so this made us identify that the two most important hazards for Quebec workers were the increase in extreme weather events and the increase in heat waves. So after that, we have conducted another analysis where we have looked at the occupation. So 500 occupation that we find in the National Occupational Classification system, and we look at this occupation to see which of these occupation would be the most at risk. And so with the analysis we've conducted, we could see that there were 50 occupations that were the most at risk for the increased heat waves and 12 occupations that were the most at risk for the increase in extreme weather events. So here it's small, but you can see the list of all the occupations that were the most at risk for heat waves and for extreme weather events. We have continued for the second objective of the research. We have continued the work on the heat wave hazards. So the idea was to co-develop adaptation measure. First of all, we have done a scientific and gray literature review to look at adaptation measures that were published. And the adaptation measure were classified in 4 categories. So risk assessment, administrative measure, engineering control, and personal protection measure. After that, we have organized a workshop to present measure to stakeholder and discuss their relevance. And so we had 11 representatives from various agencies and organizations. And so this workshop made us discuss the relevance and accuracy of the measure that we have found in the literature and the need for occupation that did not have any adaptation measure. So after that, we went back to work. We look at the occupation that didn't have any adaptation measure that we found. So what we did is we look first of all at the occupation where we had adaptation measure. We look at the task related to this occupation, and then we look at the occupation without adaptation measure where we could find the same task. And so when the tasks were similar, well, we applied the adaptation measure from one occupation to the other occupation. After that work, we went back to our stakeholder. We presented our work and we concluded the work with them. So here you have an idea of what we have identified as adaptation measure for impact of heat waves on one occupation. So we have done that work for the 50 occupation that were identified at the most at risk. So for these construction worker, we have identified as risk level assessment, the monitoring of heat stress, for instance. For engineering control, we have identified that the mechanization as much as possible would be good for workers for demanding work. For administrative measure, we have identified the importance of having a heat response or alert plan, and also an acclimatization program would be also interesting. And lastly, for personal protective measure, we have identified refrigerated bandanas and cooling vest as an interesting adaptation measure, and also refreshment by wetting the skin. So as I mentioned, this study was the first in Canada to use a co-development approach to maintain the health of workers despite the anticipated consequences of heat waves. The discussion of stakeholders have validated their interest in the proposed measure, targeted problems and applying them, and identify the key measure for Quebec. Those were 3. So first of all, training and awareness of risk related to heat stress, reorganization of work, implying optimal break planning, and implementing an enhanced hydration protocol. And the co-development approach that we have used could be a real foundation for future research on strategies to prevent health problems stemming from climate change for all workplaces in Canada. So that's the end of my talk. Now I will just take the time to come back on the learning objective, and after we're going to go through a little quiz. So I told you my objective was really that at the end of my presentation, you would be able to describe the impact of climate change on workers' health and safety, describe different vulnerability factor, and also propose adaptation measure for impact of heat waves on workers. And so now we're going to see if I did a good job and if I was a good teacher. So we're going to go through quiz and we'll see with the question and your answer if I did it right. So please select the impact of climate change on health and safety of workers. It's a multiple choice. So we'll wait a little more. Oh, so it seems we will close here now. So as you can see, most of you have identified direct impact on workers, disturbance in ecosystem, and modification of the socio-economical context, and those are the right answers. So if you remember the conceptual framework, the the one published in 2012, so for Quebec only, or the one for Canada, the um, uh, impact of climate change are all divided in three categories. So the impact that are direct on workers, such as increased zoonosis, increased temperature, increased exposure to UV radiation, etc. The disturbance in the ecosystem, so agricultural ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem, etc. And finally, the modification of the socio-economical context, such as the degradation in the built environment and the increase in green jobs. So we can go to the second question. Okay. So what vulnerability factor can exacerbate the impact of climate change on occupational health and safety? Individual factors, working environment, type of work, have good lifestyle habits. We can wait a little more. Okay, so we have, for most of you, you have voted for individual factor, working environment, and type of work. And this is true. Those are the three good answer. Actually, having good lifestyle habits is a more protection factor than a vulnerability factor. So this is why it's not the right answer. We can go to the last question. So what categories of adaptation measure were suggested to protect workers from the impact of heat waves? Risk level assessment, administrative measure, engineering control, personal protective measure, or the protection from tick and mosquito bite. I can wait 5, 10 more seconds. Oh, it seems that everybody has voted. So, well, the right answer are risk level assessment, administrative measure, engineering control, and personal protective measure too. The protection of ticks and mosquito bites would be a good adaptation measure for zoonoses, so for tick-borne diseases and mosquito-borne diseases, but they are not very good adaptation measure for heat waves impact. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy my talk, and I will be happy to answer questions and discuss with you.